Well, Mike, it does.
That's good.
This is my role now to say, oh, it's perfect. In actual fact, what happens with this is yes, it does make sense historically. It goes back to what I said with the second slide. You can see, I don't want to bore you to death with analyzing data here, but one of the things that immediately occurs to me is I'm seeing partial data. I don't look at this and see perfection. I see, because of the way my mind works, my glass is always half full where the database is concerned. So I immediately identify things on this graph that need to be worked at. In other words, I have a whole bunch of data missing that I now know that my team have to come back and look for and enter. Whether it was an oversight or we haven't done it yet, the shape isn't quite where I would want it to be. But the military office start dates, yeah, this is right. This is sort of where you would expect to see all of these things happening with the creation of those big armies. In actual fact, if you break it down, you can begin to see that there's a kind of solid line across the bottom there, and that would be the very basic military establishment. And then you would be looking at adding things on. Now, one of the things about this data is that it is confusing in a sense. It's complex data. Because, as Mike said, we have 1,618 people with 4,169 offices. Clearly, that can't be completely and entirely represented in this particular graph. So what I then ask Mike for is, can we have an extraction for date? Then I can identify individuals. Can we have an extraction for a certain group, or cohort as we call it? And that is the kind of information that you can start to mine the data more generally. You look at a broad pattern and think, does that actually make any sense to me? And then start to core down further into the data and see who people are at a given time. If you want to, can you go ahead? I'm the worst person for technology. It's like the laser is scaring me. Here we are. The end date. This, again, we have slightly skewed data, 5967. It does make a lot of sense that we would have a lot of people winding up their careers. But again, that could be an anomaly in data. That would have to be checked. I would have to go through that. I know that I have all these guys who die by 1594, but frankly, I don't know when they die, most of them. I've only found pension information for 3 widows. So, you know, it's the kind of thing that, as Mike says, will go on for a lot of years as we look at different parts of the database. And as you can imagine, it's a very time-consuming process, and we're now in the part of it, having built the thing, where we can devote a lot of time to very painstaking correction of data and accuracy in data. So these histograms that Mike's shown you are, to me, diagnostics of future work as much as they are, in a sense, indicators of perfect data. And we all know that when we're working on it. So this data for civilian office start and end dates, this data is complete only for a small number of people within the cohort. It's not 1,618. Probably the real figure would be closer, that we have civilian office profiles in about 200 to 225 people. As you can see, some people hold a lot of offices, because if you're looking at total numbers in here, there's another histogram to show this. The profile in here is very interesting to me, that it spans such a long period of time. Nearly 70 years from the beginning to the end of the end dates. So we're really looking at office holding over a very long period of time, 3 generations or more. The start date, similarly, I think our first person's 1554. These people, incidentally, get their first civilian offices under the reign of Mary and Philip II of Spain. So they're clearly Catholic, and they're clearly well disposed to that. But nonetheless, a lot of these guys are able to stay through. Civilian office start dates. This is a coring in. I'm not really sure why these 4 years are so important, but I hazard a guess that when James the First came to the throne, he started giving offices away like crazy. So you can see that the captains who lived and had some glory were right in line to make good on their careers. Elizabeth I was very, very stingy with offices. So one of the things you look at is that total of the 400 worth having, and you start to look at which of our guys get them, and you realize they do really well. 91% of living captains in 1603, for example, are knighted by 1610. So it's a fairly large indicator in the reign of James I as to whether or not you're going to get a knighthood. Of them, you could probably say about a third get peerages. So yes, the military career is important. There are some disasters. In 1599, Essex's great retinue, they all get into disgrace, and he is executed for treason in 1601. Some of those guys will disappear. When Leicester dies, some of his people in 1588, they don't seem to reappear on the radar at all. Who's picking up the slack? Well, if this was a different kind of presentation, we could get into that because it would take about an hour to explain. But there's a very interesting subtext going on politically here between the two great military leaders, because other people are actually picking up on this and manipulating it to their own ends, people in the Privy Council. It's not as if military patronage is gone. We find that it's dispersed into hands that are otherwise not very easily observable when you look at the anecdotal evidence. So to summarize these histograms, again, they're diagnostics in the database, what needs working on, but they're also indicators that the existing narrative of military culture in early modern England, which is primarily based on a very good use of anecdotal evidence, will never actually add up to this. Now, office holding, first office. Some of these are anomalies. I think this guy is right. I think he's hauled in at the end. This is one of the Blount brothers. They just kind of put him on a horse at 70 and say, you know, here, just collect your money. These are obviously court boys, right? Kids who grow up at court, and they get captaincies at 10, 12, 13, and it's true, they do. It's a very lucrative office if you don't actually have to use the office. Captains get a great deal of money in their pocket, and they were unscrupulous. In the first half of the year, each of these guys is coming into a lot of money given them directly by the Crown, somewhere around £1,000 to pay for all these troops. Well, you can imagine if for the first time in your life you had £1,000 put in your hand, you might not pay your troops, or feed them, or clothe them. And at the half-year mark, you're supposed to submit the receipts to the commissary, and they give you another £1,000 for the second half of the year. Well, a lot of our guys, the younger ones especially, are a little bit irresponsible with this, and sometimes they just decide to sell the whole company. You know, because you can make money out of it. The other neat thing, I suppose, from a Hispanic perspective, is you know that there's this ineradicable difference between sort of, you know, the noble warrior and the merchant class. These people have to be both. They're both warriors and merchants because they have to run their own accounts. They have to deal with people who supply butter, bread, beer, beef, clothing, munitions, and everything else. So, in a sense, they're really part of a mercantile world as well. So, the attraction to this office is very high. Most of them get into it for sort of chivalric reasons and then realize that they can really farm that office. So you see a transition there as well. I'm not sure how complete this later date is. I'm not sure.
So this is a good example of, I generate a histogram and I look at it and go, does this actually make any sense? I mean, here's somebody at 70 years old. Is this really a point in the database? Well, I mean, or is it just an error that's been entered? And so you have this constant challenge between what shows up as perhaps anomalies, which may be in fact factual, versus things that may not be factual. And so someplace along the line, somebody has to check them. That's Bill's job.
That's my job. And the other thing, too, is that you got a lot of careers, very important careers. And we've only looked at English sources. A lot of important military careers will be found elsewhere. For example, Lord Dunsany, a very good example, or Sir Richard Bingham, both get their start fighting in Marian armies with the Spanish Tercio. And they come back and they've actually got that experience. But we don't have the source material to locate within the Spanish archives at Simancas who were the pensioners, who were the volunteers with the Spanish army at that point. There's even anecdotal evidence to suggest that 20 or more of these guys were at Lepanto. And the other thing with military careers, you know, you get weird ages. Some of you will know Mondragon, do you know Mondragon, the general who was in the Spanish Netherlands, fights his last battle at 96. Like, you don't retire. Sir John Forster, who was the warden of the North Marches, lived to be 102. They strapped him to a troika and pulled him into battle at the age of 101. And he was senile. It's like, I don't know what he knew what was going on, but it was like, there's no concept of retirement here, okay? So there's this iffy stuff about, you know, when an office actually ends. Year born versus first year of office. Mike's used this data because one of the clear pieces of data we have is first year of office. You can tell when an office starts. Mike alluded to complexity. Those of you who work in the Spanish court will know. A lot of offices end with a person's death only. A lot of offices end with a monarch's death only. A lot of offices are annual. Some of them are triennial. Some of them last only as long as, for example, at a Cortes or an English Parliament. They don't go further than that. So that's the kind of data that has to be looked at very carefully.